one of the first Five Nights at Freddy's theories. One so ridiculous, so unfounded that even at the time, fans mostly referred to it as a joke, might have just been proven true. Kind of. We unfortunately need to revisit an 11-year-old question. Is Foxy a good guy? Don't click off, I swear this is interesting. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. The original Is Foxy a Good Guy theory was mostly cope, because Foxy's jump scare in FNAF 1 is really bad. So some people thought that this was actually intentional and on purpose, and that Foxy was checking in on the night guard to make sure he was okay, but the night guard gets so scared that he has a heart attack and dies anyways. Thus the theory Foxy is a good guy was created. Is that what I'm arguing today? Hell no, not even a little bit. But what I am suggesting is that taking into account Secret of the Mimic, Foxy might not be who we thought he was. So it's time to go back, way back to the 1970s. One of the most revealing parts about Secret of the Mimic was learning what role Foxy played in Murray's Costume Manor, namely the Foxy Puppet Show. There was an entire theater dedicated to showcasing one of their automated story events, and the story was automated about Foxy, Roxy, and the rest of their pirate crew under Captain Springlock, which is a whole thing we're gonna get into. But the interesting part about this show is that nowhere is there any Fazbear branding. In fact, we see Fiona make a Roxy hand puppet as a personal gift to David way earlier in the timeline. So combining all of that with the fact that this puppet show has several characters we've never heard of before, I think it's incredibly likely that this is telling us Foxy and likewise Roxy are original creations of Murray's Costume Manor, likely originally created, drafted, and designed by Fiona Murray herself. And then when Fazbear Entertainment began buying up all of Murray's Costume Manor and its assets, they retained Foxy in that merger and began to use him as a standalone character. As we see in the Prototype Pizzeria, Prototype Foxy is already there, planned to join the crew at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Frankly, I think this makes a lot of sense. Notably, in every single appearance Foxy has had, he is separated from the group, having his own stage and own area. Not only that, but in the Freddy and Friends on Tour show that we get to see episodes of, Foxy always seems to be the villain. Well, a fake Foxy, until eventually Foxy joins the band, again denoting a later join to the party. But although Foxy seems somewhat separate and we get near confirmation in this game that it was a Murray's character first that was brought onto Fazbear, realistically what has Foxy done in the timeline to get any special treatment? To be very frank, all the interesting things Foxy does are after the Help Wanted era of games. The first 7 games, Foxy is kind of just another animatronic, which makes sense. I don't think this plotline would have been even thought about until the Mimic storyline started to be created, and I think the Mimic started to be written as a character around after Ultimate Custom Night. But before then, Foxy just kind of kills the Night Guard like anybody else. Sure, he functions slightly differently, but I don't think that's necessarily indicative of a plan, just that he functioned differently in the first game and Scott kept it going. But by the time of Help Wanted, things start to be a little different. In the Curse of Dreadbear DLC for Help Wanted that shows us Fall Fest of '83, Foxy shows up twice. First, he has, in my favorite iteration, Captain Foxy's Pirate Ride, in which you have a dark ride where you're shooting targets. It's not that notable, but he does get his own dedicated ride at a Fall Fest. The other time he shows up is in the Corn Maze, where Jacko Foxy, this on-fire version of Foxy, is stalking the maze trying to catch the player. He's the main obstacle for this minigame. Then in Security Breach, Foxy is mysteriously absent. He was obviously meant to be there at some point in the Pizzaplex. There's a kid's cove fully themed around him with a massive statue, and as we learned in Ruin, he had a whole area dedicated to him attached to the Roxy Raceway that was either never finished or recently closed, mainly because the Foxy log flume had too many accidents and was deemed unsafe and not able to open. But there is so much Foxy merchandise throughout the Pizzaplex, it seems like he was planned to be added, but never was. And then finally in Help Wanted 2, we actually do get to ride that log flume. So all of that brings us to now. Holy shit, they're in space now. No, for real though, there's a new Astro Lounge Pixel Cup and 40-ounce spaced out metal tumbler from GamerSupps. This whole drop looks sick, but keep in mind it's only for a limited time while supplies last. Don't forget, if you want to get this or anything else from GamerSupps, use my code RYTOS for 10% off your order. Okay, so all of that is interesting, but there isn't really a through line. As far as we can tell, it's just Foxy getting an occasional spotlight with nothing more. So what's the deal? Well, I got an email to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza podcast. It's the weekly podcast all about FNAF that I have right here on this channel. And that email from Logan gave me something worth looking into. The phrase, "the real treasure was friendship all along." It's an unassuming line, isn't it? The real treasure was friendship all along fits the theming of Foxy and the demographic of the audience so perfectly that it kind of feels like a throwaway line, something that many of us, myself included, didn't really pay attention to. So when they say it at the very end of that Help Wanted 2 Foxy log flume, it just kind of flies under the radar.
And the real treasure was friendship all along.
But notably, the very same line gets said at the end of the Help Wanted 1 Foxy rhyme.
The real treasure was friendship all along.
Okay, so maybe it's just a callback. After all, they're both Foxy rides and they both end in a birthday, so that seems fairly fitting. But what if I told you this isn't the furthest back that this line is calling to? As it turns out, a very similar line was one of the last lines said during that Foxy puppet show.
The perfect present was friendship all along.
That's right, this catchphrase was seemingly coined more than 50 years prior in the timeline, all the way back to the Murray's Costume Manor days. But again, does this tell us anything? Right now, all we're learning is that Foxy has a catchphrase that none of us really paid attention to. Does it mean anything for the lore of this franchise? Well, I think it does, because as Logan pointed out in his email, there's one other time a line like this is said in the franchise. In fact, it's also in Secret of the Mimic, at the end of the secret ending. Specifically, at the end of the storybook we play for M2.
The moral of the story is that friendship is the real treasure.
Well, that's not quite the same, is it? This isn't a Fazbear entity. Sure, animals that Fazbear characters will be based on are in this book, plus 2 other ones. This book is going to be its own video at some point. But this story isn't about Foxy. Hell, it doesn't even mention Foxy at all. There's just a fox in it. It's just a story about animals. But even still, it ends with that same line. It is its own story, one very likely written by Fiona herself. After all, Fiona eventually pretty much became the creative director of most projects at Murray's Costume Manor, and this storybook automation machine was likely made to train M2 into becoming David. Either that or it's yet another way that Edwin ignored his son, but that's so sad I don't even want to think about it. But this storybook is so currently effective that it stuns M2 long enough for Arnold to be able to manually reboot its endoskeleton. But if this story, and with it this line, is a creation of Fiona, being said by Foxy, a creation of Fiona, is this through line telling us that Fiona, or at least M1, has some lingering control over Foxy? Well, I don't think it's as direct as that. But with that in mind, let's go over what Foxy is doing post-Help Wanted again. In the Curse of Dreadbird DLC, a flaming Foxy is patrolling a maze where the very center of it holds the Vanny mask, an Easter egg that you need to traverse the entire maze and get back to the center to access. It is difficult to get this mask. It took me an hour my first time just dying and getting lost, and a big part of that is Foxy's protection of it. And this isn't the only time that Foxy is trying to keep the player away from this Vanny mask. In Princess Quest 3, we end up playing through a representation of Help Wanted, and in that iteration, it's still a burning Foxy trying to keep the player from accessing the Vanny mask. Whatever this mask is, this Foxy does not want anyone to get access to it. And with Secret of the Mimic in mind, what do you think might be being represented by a flaming Foxy at a fall fest? Fiona Murray, the woman who designed Foxy, who died in a fire at Fall Fest. I think in the current storyline of Five Nights at Freddy's, M1 is trying to get rid of Glitchtrap, and is reaching through her own creations to do so. First with Foxy in Help Wanted, noticing that Glitchtrap is trying to get a hold of the mind of somebody to get out, M1 is doing everything she can to prevent it, trying to separate the player from the mask that allows Glitchtrap to enter their mind. but ultimately failing with Vanessa. But Glitchtrap notices this interference. So in the creation of the Pizzaplex, Glitchtrap actively prevents any Foxy attractions from being built, making sure they're unsafe and unstable, trying to make sure M1 doesn't have any anchor points within the Pizzaplex to try to claw her way in. But it doesn't work, not fully. M1 is able to sneak her way into the Princess Quest arcade machines, still trying to give Vanessa a way out of her control under Glitchtrap. Isn't it strange that Princess Quest 1 and Princess Quest 2 are thematically nearly identical? Fantasy games where we're going through castles and caverns trying to protect the princess. But then you suddenly step through a glitch, and Princess Quest 3 is help wanted. And in beating Princess Quest 3, suddenly Vanessa is freed from Glitchtrap's control. To me, the most likely explanation here is that M1 is trying to rewrite one of the Princess Quest arcade machines to make it beatable. I don't think Princess Quest 3 was meant to be beaten. Look at Balloon World, another arcade machine that people theorize is holding on to Gregory's mind. If you try to beat that and do all the glitches and try to do everything specifically, you're still told good night. You're still shut down. And I think Princess Quest 3 is just the same. Because what is the ending of Princess Quest 2 but going to sleep, locking your mind away? But M1 managed to make a vulnerability in Princess Quest 3. And in building out this vulnerability to try to give Vanessa a chance to escape, M1 had to pull on her own dataset and own knowledge to create something. The only thing M1 would know at this point, the research and development pizzeria, the same one that was used as a base for Help Wanted. Hell, we spawn where M1 is in research and development, and we are finally able to be successful in getting Vanessa out of Glitchtrap's control. And while Glitchtrap might notice this, Vanessa's already gone and there's still no Foxy, so he thinks that he's otherwise safe from M1, forgetting that there was one other creation that Fiona might be able to get hold of, and that's Roxy. Roxanne Wolf was another Fiona creation, and I think the reason why Roxy starts acting so erratically throughout Ruin, breaking free of Glitchtrap's control, is because of M1's influence on her programming. Glitchtrap notices this too, which is why at the end of Ruin, even though it makes no logical sense, Glitchtrap tells us that Roxy is a security node and needs to be deactivated. Roxy is not a security node, but Glitchtrap knows that M1 is getting her claws into Roxy, and he wants to shut it down before it becomes a problem. So he has Cassie do the dirty work and turn off Roxy. But just like Eclipse, it doesn't shut off Roxy, it reboots her, and frankly reboots her free of any Glitchtrap control, which is why at the end of Ruin, Roxy's able to step in and save Cassie. This one's a little out there, but I think it does make a lot of sense, right? After all, if William Afton keeps showing up as Spring Bonnie, possibly Fiona kept showing up in control over Foxy. Or at least, when given the opportunity, she expresses her control through Foxy. But I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This is a bit of a stranger one. In the meantime, if you want to know more about how Fiona and Afton are interacting in Help Wanted 2, I actually just made a whole video on that last week, which you can find right here. For your fan art feature on the channel, make sure to share with hashtag Toastart. A huge thank you to the best channel members, the Dough Risers, and until next time, as always, stay toasty, slices.